Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this live Minera Alamos event. I'm joined again by Minera's president, Doug Ramshaw, who'll be presenting a brief overview. But this is an interactive event, and we encourage you to submit your questions using the chat feature located in the bottom right corner of your screen. We try and address all questions for today, but if we're unable to do so, we'll be sure to forward them to the Minera team post-event. This event is being recorded and will be available for viewing later today. With that housekeeping out of the way, Doug, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carl, and thanks everyone for attending today. It's actually been a while, overdue, since I've done a Minera-specific town hall, and I think shareholders and investors needed that with our developments at the end of last year and our plans looking forward to 2025. I will go through the presentation. Sometimes I look at questions coming in and I try to address them kind of on the fly. I'm hoping that the presentation largely covers off, a lot of the questions that might be submitted, but please do that. And the ones which I don't think I adequately covered during the presentation, I will certainly leave time to address at the end. I will be making some forward-looking statements today, and it's important to read through that at your leisure to understand the importance of that slide. Also wanted to give you an overview before I got into the presentation of what to expect today. So there is, despite lack of paperwork, there is a lot to talk about vis-a-vis Mexico, and I want to start off with that. There will be some broad company overview slides, which for people who've seen me before will know and have seen them before. But before getting into a little bit of a project overview of Sabre, the Sabre Gold acquisition we announced in October of last year will be closing next week. Wanted to provide a bit of a project overview there. And then we're going to get into Mexico and really leading off with the operational improvements we saw in Q4. As much as I can talk about those prior to financials and the like, but there's a lot to be positive about in terms of how Q3's work led into Q4 operational improvements. A little bit of update on Cerro de Oro and our other stuff in Mexico, and then finally kind of a bit of a brief update on our plans for Minera Copper and the catalyst for 2025 we should be looking for, and the news flow associated with it. I think 2024 we had better news flow. I think we can still look to improve that. I think 2025 will certainly build off an improvement in 2024 in many regards, including news flow. So that's kind of what to expect today. And so, in the past, Minera has been purely a Mexican gold developer, and probably if we had something in Arizona in the last couple of years, the headwinds of a shifting Mexican political dynamic would not have hit us quite so hard. But I'm actually very happy that things are starting to improve in Mexico, and were improving in Mexico in terms of sentiment when we announced the Copperstone acquisition, because in no way was Copperstone some pivot because of concerns about Mexico, but I think it was a prudent addition of a Minera-style asset, literally just over the border in a country now that, Arizona was always a mining-friendly state, but I think with the new political forces at will in America, I think resource development has, good tailwinds behind it that can only help in already mining-friendly states. So obviously Santana is in production. It's seemingly always going through a constant state of ramp up. Cerro de Oro in permitting, and I'll get to where we, have expectations in terms of permit receipt there, and Fortuna waiting in the wings. But let's talk about Mexico. So what is changing in Mexico is sentiment. There was a shift in positive sentiment. We saw it in September and October in the lead up to Ms. Scheinbaum's inauguration down there. But that really is all it's been, a shift in sentiment. And we now need to see that shift confirmed by paperwork flowing. And I think it's a very reasonable take that the new administration, albeit the same party in Mexico, there was not going to be a Joe Biden Keystone moment day one in office, killing the Keystone pipeline. You were not going to see Ms. Scheinbaum throwing out permits on day one. And part of that is, the government takes time to position the civil servants in their new departments. There was also a need after big cuts to the civil service to get more warm bodies in place, and so it wasn't going to be an overnight thing, and that's what we said in September and October, but what we also said seems to be coming to pass, which was expect to see movement on permits in early 2025. And we have seen that. Now, I think the biggest news in the last couple of weeks, as people kind of take stock of the new, I think, more pragmatic Scheinbaum administration, where she has made very pro-business cabinet choices. The Minister of Economy, very pro-business, very pro-mining. Mining falls under his purview, and many others, have been positive. And we saw that in, last week when Mexico and all the various ministries covering all aspects of the Mexican economy, not just mining, had been pulling their resources together to launch, the 2025 to 2030 National Development Plan. And a few key highlights from that that I think clearly pertain to mining, and there was a lot in there, and there are better geopolitical analysts than myself covering off this. I've highlighted a few there. Reduction in investment red tape to speed up approvals. I mean, I think a big thing on the approvals is just getting the departments restaffed. Mining was designated a strategic sector. I think that really I think anyone who knows Mexico has a tremendous history of mining, but it was designated a strategic sector, and that is important. Highlighting an international roadshow to attract foreign investment to the mining sector. Mining, does well-paid jobs, obviously. I think from a tax receipt perspective, the past administration were making more money from the mining sector than any previous administration. So the one thing Claudia Scheinbaum has always said, however, is that mining has to be done in a sustainable and environmentally conscious manner as possible. And I don't think that should just apply to Mexico. I think it should apply to any country in the world. She also said that, she wanted projects that had strong local support and met those strong environmental guidelines. But in no shape or form was this someone that was anti-mining. And I think we will see the Scheinbaum administration be far more pro-mining than the last few years of the AMLO administration. And I think some of these highlights of the National Development Plan kind of underscore that. Interestingly, Sonora, Durango, and Zacatecas were identified as key drivers of the mining sector and will be granted priority status by the federal government for public sector projects to improve infrastructure to support mine development. It's not lost on me that our 3 projects in Mexico are in Sonora, Durango, and Zacatecas. But notwithstanding public sector support to improve infrastructure, there is going to be a need for mining companies, and mines establish and help support infrastructure. It's not just jobs; it's the infrastructure in the areas that they're at, and so. There were comments about the need for local training. Mexico has a tremendous mining workforce. There are plenty of ways to further a project's impact on our economy, not just from driving the jobs for your actual mine, but also what you can do in the local economy. And I think that's one of the reasons why these northern mining states, mining is at the very, DNA of these states. And it's one of the reasons why, as we get onto this review of the open pit ban bill, as it was presented, or as it came out of, I think it was October, a committee stage bill, which was never brought to the floor at the lower house in Mexico, continued this language with regard to open pit bans. And it would be dead on arrival in the Senate in its current form. It was far, far stricter than what Claudia Sheinbaum's electoral platform had. And I think that's, my take when she said there needed to be a government review of that bill was the same as, I think it was Newmont that came out saying this is a positive. And I think it is a positive because for that bill, which may still get voted on in the lower house, to have a chance in hell of getting through the Senate, it needs to be severely watered down from its current state. And so I think when you look at mining states in the north, with greater than 20% of their GDP coming from mining, there was never going to be Senate support for the bill as it stood. So we may still see that advance for a vote in the lower house, but I think look for this government review to kind of handcuff it to a point where it has more of a chance to pass at the Senate level. And I believe, as do many others, that the only way it can pass at the Senate level is for projects to be looked at on a case-by-case basis rather than some blanket ideological ban. So this de facto, not enshrined in law, but this de facto ban that has overhung the industry for the last 2 years, I think we will see movement in the first half of this year to show that, for the first time, to have something where you can counter the negative headlines. Because honestly, if I was an investor and my only source were headlines that were propagating open pit bans and whatever, of course it would make me nervous. And it's been incredibly hard for me and others in the last couple of years to push back against that. And that comes back to this sentiment shift. Sentiment is improving, but unless we see the paperwork, that's all it is. So where are we seeing the paperwork? There has been permit movement recently. Avino, I think it was beginning of last week, received their last permits that they required for the construction of their La Preciosa mine. Now, that's an underground mine. And before people point to it and go, oh, it's an underground mine, the reality is all paperwork had come to a grinding halt in the last year. So the low-hanging fruit is going to be permit amendments and underground mines, but all we need is to start seeing paperwork moving forward again. And I've been bitten by trying to provide timelines at a time where, because investors crave timelines, at a time where it's very, very hard to, they're all best guesstimates. And the reality is things got tougher and tougher in the last 18 months. And so that made timelines seem worse and worse in terms of their accuracy. So I find it very interesting that we have seen companies publicly in press releases put timelines. Now that's either really ballsy, because I'm not going to do that again. I've got expectations, I've got assumptions, and we'll get to those later. But it's pretty ballsy to put that in a press release unless you've really got clear insight and you're getting word from the Mexican authorities that things are moving and going to move. So Go Gold on January 8th announced they expect the permits for their Los Ricos underground mine by end of March. Alamos Gold, they kind of missed their year-end 2024 timeline, but they were expecting a permit amendment at their Mulatos complex for their PDA deposit by the end of 2024. Mexico kind of shuts down for Christmas kind of second week of December. So that's another one to look out for. But again, I mean, Alamos Gold have been cutting the biggest checks that they have to the government in terms of taxes down there. I'm sure that they have insight that, you know, as the government kind of reorders itself and moves forward, that paperwork is flowing too. And before looking at these as just underground operations, I'm not sure if it was in a press release, but certainly to the analyst community, they have had long-awaited layback amendments for their giant Camino Rojo open pit mine in Zacatecas that I believe last guidance I saw was first half of 2025. And again, my sense would be after the last couple of years, most companies are going to err on the side of under-promising to over-deliver. So that's just 3 examples. And quite honestly, we just need to see someone get something somewhere to fuel that positive sentiment with paperwork that's following behind it. So we are very encouraged by the outlook for Mexico in 2025. That being said, I think the timely acquisition of Copperstone means we do have a path to self-determination regardless of how fast or slow paperwork in Mexico moves. But we are very encouraged by that shift that we're seeing come through. And it is what we were saying in September and October. And I haven't often been right about Mexico for the last couple of years. So I'm not exactly going to have a ticker tape parade because even a broken clock can be right twice a day. But I think it is encouraging to see, and I think we will see more positive headlines in Mexico in the coming months. So where does that leave us? Well, we have 3 advanced projects in Mexico. La Fortuna with permits. We want to make it bigger before building it. Cerro de Oro, that's in the permitting process. Santana's in production, and we'll get to the improving operating performance at Santana later. And then Copperstone, it actually is fully permitted plan of operations. We're making some modifications to allow multiple paths for processing there, rather than selecting one or other of the current approved paths. And so, but when you're a developer, the holy grail is permit receipt. And you can look around at companies in other jurisdictions that get their permits and the impact of that. And sometimes it's the impact on your stock of someone else getting their permits, which I think we've seen before with Minera, and I think we'll see again that we're not first in line to get permits at Cerro de Oro, but we don't have to be. We just need to start seeing a shift in paperwork moving forward, and we'll get some of that benefit even before our permits drop. Where do we stand? Not much has changed. We did do a modest, prudent equity raise in Q4, and I know there was a bit of sticker shock to that because we're a company that has very rarely gone to the market. But we thought it was prudent rather than trying to thread a needle and avoid that. And so we're in a pretty healthy position, cash and working capital. Next week with the Sabre deal closing, there'll be a new updated presentation that has the updated pro forma capital structure of the company. And I know people are going to ask, and they are right to ask, at what point do we consider a rollback? We have not, since we did the Minera Corex merger in 2018, we brought two companies together that had 150 million shares out each. There was no raise at the time. We did the subsequent kind of financing raise associated with that merger about a year later in 2019. And that took us to 350 million shares. In 5.5 years, we suffered about 30% dilution, which is very good by industry standards. But of course, then you do an equity raise and an acquisition, it seems like numbers have gone up. My sense is at some point there will be a housekeeping rollback, but I don't think it's coming anytime soon. I would like to time it sometime in the summer on the back of Cerro de Oro permits. I think a rollback around a catalyst is the best way of approaching it, and there's no better catalyst for me than the Cerro de Oro permits. So, we will address that, but not right now. We got a strong team. Our underground experience, we certainly lean on Kevin Small, our independent director, that is an exceptional underground mining engineer that sits on the board. We will be making some additions with regard to Sabre for the team that will be looking after Copperstone. And expect to see some news on when we actually formally close that. We'll have some additional color on how we're expanding the team to ensure that we've got the necessary bandwidth for, again, something which could see dual track development of something being built in Arizona at the same time as construction is ongoing at Cerro de Oro in Mexico. So where are we? Well, I think everyone knows by now, it's the title of the presentation. We focus on these low capex projects. They're modest in terms of overall resources, but they can grow, deploying cash flow from operations. I think they are highly insulated from inflation. Copperstone very much met kind of our Minera style model of project. Yeah, it's 40,000 ounce type mine, 36 million in capex, pretty well positioned on the cost curve, although higher cost than our projects in Mexico. But it complements as well as gives us a jurisdictional diversification that, rather like you want to be a multi-mine company, you want to be multi-jurisdiction. I think the last few years in Mexico absolutely highlight the importance of it, but I'm glad that we are literally just over the border in Arizona. We're not some other part of the world. Everything's on similar time zones, and there will be some of our team. Miguel Cardona, our VPX, will be heavily involved in the exploration upside that presents at Copperstone and reviewing all the data, both drilling information from the mine. The resource there has, about 160,000 meters of drilling and forms that resource. There's tremendous exploration upside outside of that. And I think that will be covered off in future news flow, where we do want to, we're looking at this as a project we can build rapidly, but we also want to start talking about the exploration upside that will exist at Copperstone and does exist at Copperstone. And it fit very nicely in where we sit with our capital intensity slide. So it wasn't difficult to add Copperstone in here. And so again, it was we think a smart deal to add to the development track. And I think if we're fortunate enough to have the dual track development, a lot of the lost time, which has been tough for our shareholders over the last couple of years, can be made up very, very quickly with both Cerro de Oro and Copperstone coming into production in 2026. Suddenly provides a 100,000 ounce type forward run rate just from those two projects. We'll make up in short order some of the kind of lost time of the last couple of years. It was a historic producer from an open pit, about 500,000 ounces, 2.8 grams per ton. And the system that extended up into the open pit extends into the subsurface, and that's what is a high-grade resource. Resource actually, uncut, undiluted, is probably about 12 gram. But there are some very strict dilution controls that have been put in place in the new PEA to address issues from the past. And so, we're looking more like a 7 gram underground deposit. Where we're applying, close to 50% dilution on grade in some parts, on some of the stopes. We think it gives visibility now to 150,000 ounce plus production platform beyond what Santana is able to contribute. Very happy that we've eliminated any debt that was associated with Sabre, and it's expected to close next week. Overall, we saw a 35% increase in our total resource inventory to just under 2 million ounces with its acquisition. Big 60% jump in measured and indicated resources. Acquisition costs that were very much in line with industry comparables. And again, a complementary 40,000 ounces of planned production. That's on the initial 6-year mine life, and there's obviously a lot of potential beyond that. The project has it's got over $60 million in tax losses that will be available to us in the US. So when it comes to the PEA, when we're looking at pre-tax and after-tax, there isn't actually a huge difference between the two, because we are going to be able to make use of those tax losses, and that kind of speaks to the amount of investment that's being put into this project. I think what's relevant investment is over $25 million in underground development and surface infrastructure that we can take advantage of. We also, as I said, the shift in jurisdictional de-risking starts to nicely give us a blend of 20 to 80% US to Mexico in terms of our asset MPV, and our measured and indicated resources close to 40% of those now, or 60% in the US. So there is an operating plan of operation is permitted for production. We're going to have more updates on Sabre. We've been getting new paperwork and approvals on minor modifications, and what we want to do is this has draft approvals for the company to choose one or other of a processing path for it. We actually believe that with trade-off studies, the economics are enhanced by having a combination of those two, rather than having to select one or the other. They've both gone through technical review as processes. So we're going to make some minor modifications just to ensure that we can have the best economics of this. Copperstone will produce a low-grade copper con that actually contains the precious metals, and there's a tremendous concentrate market right now in the US, and we're looking at ways to capitalize on the modest value of the copper associated with the gold and silver here as well. Here's some of the plant infrastructure. It's all in very good shape. In the case of a couple of bins, I would argue it could do with a lick of paint. The one thing that they did not have was a mill. That had been scrapped some years back for some cash, and so we actually happen to have a large enough mill in storage in Val d'Or, Quebec, It was originally slated to go down to La Fortuna in time. It was oversized for La Fortuna. The La Fortuna PEA called for about 1,100 tons a day. It was a 2,000 ton a day mill. So we will be looking at relocating most of that mill down here at the Copperstone site. In time, parts of it can move on to Fortuna. But the beauty of this mill is it was one missing part of the PEA. The PEA, which had a $36 million pre-production capital, about 40% of that number was plant and processing. Now, we don't save 40% of that number with the Fortuna mill. Arguably, maybe there's a $7 or $8 million saving from that capex number. I'm not going to say the capex is going to reduce, however. I think what it does is, in a world where we've seen capex go up all over the world in all manner of projects, I think having the mill means that those numbers are the ones that will accommodate now any other inflationary pressures on the build, and the mill will help in that regard. So we still look at this as a $35 million build. That's the Copperstone PEA released in 2023. One of the requirements on a plan of arrangement like this is re-releasing the PEA in our company's name. Now, there are going to be some very minor adjustments to the PEA as a result of we want to be able to demonstrate the project sensitivity at higher gold prices. We can't talk about, I wouldn't be able to tell you a spot gold case now. It'd be pretty easy to work it out, but I couldn't do that formally if you don't have the sensitivity tables in a PEA. So we'll actually take the PEA sensitivity tables probably out to $3,000 an ounce. Not that we need it. It makes good money at 2,000 or even 1,800. The other thing that the updated PEA will show is a reduced royalty burden at Sabre. So Copperstone was not built for a number of reasons, not necessarily having the right team, tough market conditions, over-encumbered with debt, and certainly the project was over-encumbered with royalties and streams. Our partners, Star Royalties, had a stream that was too high, really, and credit to them. There's value in that stream so long as the project gets built. But if the project's too encumbered, it will never get built. So amendments were made on that Star stream. So that Star streams now is the equivalent of a 3% NSR, there or thereabouts. There were also two historic NSRs on the project. One to the family of the guy who actually found the original Copperstone project. And that sits at 1.5%. And then there was another 1.5% royalty, which has been extinguished. It was extinguished. There was an option for Sabre to do that. They exercised that option shortly after our announcement of the acquisition. So we've removed a 1.5% NSR load. And in fact, what it brings the project down to is about roughly a 4.5% NSR load. I'd love it to be lower, but it's a heck of a lot better than something which is actually approaching greater than 10% implied NSR before the Star stream and before the reduction of that 1.5% royalty. At that point, as a miner, you're basically contract mining for the royalty owners. Makes no sense. So this PEA that we'll re-release will have an updated economic model that just takes into account that the royalty load has been reduced by a further 1.5% NSR. It doesn't hugely impact NPV or anything, but it's still a step in the right direction on the baseline economics before we take into account whether we can trim that capex down, other modifications, including to some of the mining techniques. This PEA, I think, looked at the whole project as being mined with pretty expensive, cut and fill operations, pretty high operating costs. We don't think cut and fill needs to be used for the whole project. There are a number of opportunities to improve the economics here. That's work that will be completed as we look to take advantage of that underground development work that's already in place, and have this ready for Q1 2026 is our goal, to have this, actually back up and running. In that regard, how do we meet the CapEx spend here? Well, we are under NDA with a number of outside lenders, outside of our core lending groups that we've worked with before. The goal is to have them in the data room upon closing of this transaction. Look to try to arrange site visits in February and March, so that we're in a position to evaluate indicative term sheets for the big spend that comes more in the second half of the year, to have this in a timely Q1 2026 back up and running. So we'll see that as well. So it is a brownfield site. There are some very minor modifications we're working on right now. We've received approvals on other things that needed to be addressed. There's tailings facilities already there that have been permitted. Exploration will be a subject of a future press release, but it's the kind of project that allows us to very rapidly get this into production. This is from their PEA, and all the surface infrastructure is there, minus the mill. And that's one piece of equipment that we had. It was the perfect fit, really, this asset, because we happen to have the one piece of infrastructure they didn't have. I mentioned earlier the underground development. There are a lot of projects that have sunk cost. I don't necessarily equate sunk cost to sunk value. In the case of Sabre and Copperstone, that sunk cost in this project is absolutely sunk value that we take advantage of. Not just the surface infrastructure, 2 underground portals giving underground access, over 4,000 meters of underground mine and access development. And that's notwithstanding what it would cost to recreate the 160,000 meters of drilling. But that I don't view the same way. This sunk cost that we have here is true sunk value we can take advantage of. And so we're particularly happy that we've got a project here that I think does not need much in the way of underground rehab. The one thing we will want to ensure that we get ahead of is underground development. I think the PEA called for 6 working phases, of which 3 or 4 would be active at any one time. I think we'll look at what year one sustaining capital can be pulled forward into pre-production capital to ensure that maybe we've got extra capacity of underground working phases. But this isn't a big initial operation. We'll probably start it up initially about 450 tons a day. So it's not like you're trying to mine 1,500 tons a day from an underground operation. It's small tons moved. They have high value, and we're very, very excited about it. This is the heavily diluted grade of the deposit. The mine plan really only focuses on the M&I component right now. There's already a few 100,000 ounces of additional inferred. There are a subject of another press release will show some of the sections that show drilling results 400 or 500 meters away that have never been followed up from the existing resource envelope, as well as further down dip, down plunge hits that, again, a company never really capitalized to even get the mine built, certainly didn't have the money to follow up on. Very interesting exploration results outside of the project. But the project's got a 6-year initial mine life. That gives you enough runway to focus future cash flows on some of that exploration follow-up. So, but yeah, Copperstone can be considerably bigger than the roughly 500,000 ounces in all resource categories that we acquired. So Santana, 2024, we started up a new mine plan on a brand new pit because we didn't want investors to be waiting for a permit amendment. We didn't want to wait for a permit amendment. We said when we had that mine plan that the benefits would be seen in Q3 and Q4. And Q3 was mainly about mining and stacking, and as we opened up the new Nicho main zone pit, which is considerably larger than the original Nicho Norte pit. And we saw those benefits. I think in Q3, we mined and stacked more gold than the whole of 2023. I mean, it's hard to really think of Santana as a mine in 2023. I think if you're going to call something a mine, you expect mining to take place. It really was on a care and maintenance mode. But those benefits in Q3 came through in Q4. And in preliminary internal numbers have indicated that, yes, as we expected in Q3 guidance, the Santana mine operations have returned to delivering quarterly operating profit in Q4 of 2024. And really, as the driver of cash generation in the company, the first thing it has to do before we start generating net cash at the corporate level is to start generating it at the mine level. And we had a significant reversal from the first 9 months of the year in Q4. That's largely due to gold production being higher in Q4. Still modest because we're still in the ramp-up mode of this new pit. And even net of the depletions from mine production, we've now got a recoverable gold inventory on the pad that's approximately 10,000 ounces. We did receive state approvals towards the end of last year for a phase of pad expansion that doesn't require a permit amendment. It could be done at the state level. That expansion prep is largely completed. The trees and scrub have all been removed from the areas where there would be need to put new, where we would be laying down new pad. Right now, we're just looking at some economic trade. We're ready to go with that. We're just looking at some economic trade-off studies of continuing to use the existing pad space in the coming months before building the phase 2 pad. But that phase 2 pad is probably something that whether we're doing it now or it will be done before the rainy season, and basically is this kind of transition pad capacity that is required while we wait on the full permit amendment that will allow for the complete valley effectively to be lined, and really supports the ongoing operations at Santana. So those trade-off studies, I think, will take place over the next month. Right now, we're just continuing to mine and add gold to the existing pad capacity, which is up on the 5th lift. So leach kinetics are a little slower just because you're on a 5th lift. Solutions take probably 2 weeks to flow through the pad. That's maybe 25 plus meters high now, on a 30 meters high, I think. On a first lift, which we will have on the new pad capacity, I mean, solutions take a couple of days to go through the pad and come off. So that coupled with more free gold in the Nicho main zone over Nicho Norte, leaching of free gold, just can take a little bit of time as well. And so, it's still kind of baby steps moving forward during this ramp up. But I think it's worth pointing out that when we opened up the Nicho Norte pit, our first blast was late May 2021. It was really only 12 months later, as the pit opens up and the pad starts working, that you saw gold production at meaningful levels that led to, real kind of cash generation. It was a 12-month process. Well, the Nicho main pit, which is now kind of fully open, and we've got the full fleet in there because it takes a while for a pit to open up, especially when it's the top of a hill. Our first blasting there was May of 2024. almost 3 years to the day after Nicho Norte. And we're seven or 8 months into that process. So I think Q1 will be similar to Q2 in that, it's still kind of in ramp up mode before we see the benefits, especially if we switch to that pad expansion. Phase 2 pad expansion will allow just full uninterrupted leaching on the current pad. And that's what we kind of want to get as much gold on the existing pad. That's kind of the current thought. Get as much gold on the existing pad so that when we shift to the mining contractor to building that extra pad capacity, we can just have uninterrupted leaching activities on the pad, and that 10,000 ounces plus what we add over the coming months, can start to be drawn down more significantly. But Q4 was a good quarter for Santana. And again, our grades are very similar right now. Reconciling, we're in the, on a month-to-month basis. Sometimes it's a little lower, sometimes it's right at, resource grade here. So there have been no great surprises in terms of grade reconciliation at Santana. Cerro de Oro. Well, we're all waiting for the Holy Grail, and I can't say that without thinking of Monty Python, but Cerro de Oro needs its permits. I think we covered off where we see things going in Mexico on the permitting side, and, we're still, our expectation, stroke assumptions for this year is Cerro de Oro permits could come kind of mid-year. And I hope that we have pleasant surprises, but before that. But I would be happy after the last couple of years. I would be happy with sometime mid-year for Cerro de Oro. This is a relatively quick and easy build for us. If it comes sooner, so much the better. But again, we're in one of these strategic states highlighted in the National Development Plan to some of those areas where Ms. Scheinbaum wants to see strong local support for projects. Well, we had support at the local town, municipal level, 100% support from the local communities. There's strong state support for this mine. And even well in advance of what kind of came out in terms of local hires and local training, our permit application for Cerro de Oro included that over 95% of hires had to be locals, had to be Mexicans. Well, I think it will be higher than that. We're not a team, that's full of expat geos coming down from Canada or the US to work in Mexico. We use local people. Our team is local. So Cerro de Oro, we know the numbers are spectacular, but they mean nothing without having that permit in hand. With that permit in hand, or even other companies starting to get permits, I think people will start having increased confidence as to the driver that Cerro de Oro is for the company. And again, we don't think CapEx numbers have changed really that much from the 2022 PEA, which did include 30% contingency. This is a project that if the permits drop, whilst we have a team focused on Copperstone in the States, our team in Mexico, our contractors in Mexico can largely be approaching the construction of Cerro de Oro in tandem with that, in parallel with that. So we hold great hope that Cerro de Oro's year is 2025. And just, again, this was a PEA done at $1,600 gold. It's interesting now. I don't think you will ever see us really highlighting spot gold cases on our projects, because we don't need spot gold cases to make our projects look fantastic. It is interesting to see that some bigger companies, some of the majors, have started to use $2,000 gold in their studies. Kinross's PEA at Dixie is a good example of that. I like to look at projects that work well wherever the gold price is, and we shouldn't be guessing where it is. We should be building things which can be stress test if gold was to come off, and take advantage if gold was to go up. So, I don't think our projects need to show a spot. I think companies that demonstrate spot case PEAs and economics probably need something closer to that spot case to justify the investment that needs to go into it. Again, the resource, it's a big low-grade system, super low strip, and we know it can get bigger. In fact, we spent a lot longer getting our surface rights prudently, I think, to encompass a permit application that covers off not just this 60,000 ounce a year, 8-year PEA mine life, but something which is much closer to a 12 to 13-year life at 80,000 ounces a year. We're hoping to work on some land deals that will highlight that upside case even before Cerro de Oro gets built. But we're prepared for the upside case. We've permitted about 120, or are permitting about 120 million tons of heap leach pad capacity. That's how sure we are of the upside case at Cerro de Oro. So it just, there won't ever be a need for a permit amendment at Cerro de Oro. This is Darren permitting things his way, as opposed to what he inherited at Santana, which was a process, unfortunately, started by another company that we kind of had to bolt on our permitting around. So Cerro de Oro will have, when it gets its permits, will be permitted not just for this resource, but for a much bigger resource and all the processing that will go into it. We do have a funding package with Oramet in November. On the basis of improved sentiment in Mexico, we extended a $5 million interim loan that we'd drawn down on it. It looked like that extension was only for about 4 months. That's how long it took for the exchange to approve everything. We are still prepared and been talking with regard to refinancing that should permits not come by end of May, which is when that extension would expire. But again, this package is there and available. And one of the reasons why there was even a fee for that extension, it is available. The $400,000 fee is effectively a standby fee. Oramet have to have the $20 million on hand, not deployed into some other project, because if we get permits, we provide a drawdown notice, they have to deliver the capital. And so there is a cost to them keeping that that money available upon receipt of our permits. So in light of 2025 looking much better, we're happy that while we work on the tailoring a project finance package for Copperstone, we have this one in place for Cerro de Oro, because rather like, we have the ability to have this dual track development. Well, it will need dual track project finance too. All being well, we need to have two lenders because we're building two mines at the same time, just across the border from each other. La Fortuna sits there with its permits. We still want to make this bigger, and I get the question a lot: when are we going to pivot to La Fortuna? And yes, in hindsight, a few years ago, if anyone could have anticipated the slowdown in permitting in Mexico, then maybe a pivot was due back then. But it's certainly not now. And I've always said, and I will say today, we won't, unless we categorically sense that Cerro de Oro is indefinitely held up in its permitting, there is no pivot to La Fortuna. And one of the attractions now of building Sabre with, Cerro de Oro permits at some point coming, we can build two things at the same time. If we pivoted to La Fortuna, which is not actually as easy as investors think, if we pivoted to there and then Cerro de Oro permits drop, we're not building two things in Mexico at the same time. So I like the fact that we're going to be building in Arizona with a team and financing package available if the Cerro de Oro permits drop in Mexico. And again, there is tremendous exploration upside there, and we really want to make this project bigger and understand just how big the project can be before we tailor a certain size of operation around it. It needs more work. The last work was when Darren and the team owned this in Castle Gold in 2008-9. They bought it back for a couple of $1 million. I mean, it was a fantastic deal, but it does need attention. So it's not quite as simple as a pivot that is, unfortunately, some people in hindsight wish we did. But we are very comfortable with Cerro de Oro getting its permits. We did start talking last year about copper. I don't want copper to be a distraction in any shape or form from either our technical bandwidth, our balance sheet, but there is value there to surface for our shareholders. We've already merged our copper sub with the Mexican company that owns the rights to Suaki Verde. So now we and them are kind of 50-50 partners at the sub level. There's one further copper asset that we hope in the first, let's call it 3 to 4 months of this year, we can put in place as well. And with that asset, we'd be close to about 1 billion pounds of low capital intensity, developable copper at a time where Claudius Scheinbaum has really extolled the virtues of Mexican copper deposits to help the EV transition. With that third asset, we'll be able to start looking at the path to either spin it out into a separate vehicle or keep all the copper and the future cash flows in a gold copper company. We will have the 3 assets to allow us to map out a path of either a go public standalone Minera Copper company or just look to gradually develop these within Minera. And I'm open-minded in that regard, and when I talk to the bankers that have shown interest in what we're doing on the copper side, I say in many ways it's a lump of clay that needs to be molded. It's a blank whiteboard that we can take all manner of paths with it. But the path that we have to take is about surfacing value for our shareholders for an asset that most people up until last year didn't even realize we had in the company. Suaki is something that will be an SXEW copper deposit. I love SXEW. It's what brought me to Canada in 1997. This was the sister project of one that Phelps Dodge and the company I worked with had called Piedras Verdes that turned into a mine. This was just smaller, got less focus. There's tremendous exploration upside there with a big underlying porphyry system. It just needs to be unlocked after being caught up in legal wranglings for about 10 years. So it's kind of one of these open pit oxide copper projects that has been frozen in time, and we're thawing it out right now. I think because I want to leave time. Oh shoot! I'm just gonna say I didn't realize how long I've been talking. Last year we had 6 goals, and we can put 3 check marks by those, and there are 3 that remained unchecked. The 3 that we were able to check off were things that we had control over. The 3 we couldn't, we didn't have control. I think one of the things about Sabre is showing that we've got a path to self-determination that clearly, the permit slowdown in Mexico slowed down our ability to advance certain things. I'm happy we got 3 check marks because it meant the stuff that we could have control over, we did. I'm looking forward to, with the resumption of permits flowing, us not having any left check marks at the end of this year. And so we have a busy year ahead. These are current expectations and assumptions. If we have mid-year Cerro de Oro permits, we will have Copperstone. We want to add additional leaching facilities to existing processing at the site there. We will begin this quarter to move parts of our mill equipment down to Copperstone and start the process in Q2 of putting it all back together. There will be phase 2 pad construction at Santana. I mentioned the Minera Copper acquisition of a third project and starting to plan either go public route or whichever route maximizes value for our shareholders. And very much hope that by early Q2, we're looking at the indicative terms for the financing package for Copperstone. Second half of the year, well, again, to some extent, this is based on us meeting our expectations, assumptions in the first half of the year, but construction decisions at Cerro de Oro, and the timeline that with that, it could come on stream in Q1 2026, largely the same time as Copperstone coming on in Q1 2026. And that would add 100,000 ounces of low cost, not just low capital cost, but low operating cost production. Expect at some point, these permit amendments, just like other permits, to start moving as well. And that will allow us to further ramp up production from the now opened up Nicho main zone. So I know I should have a clock on my desk because I probably wouldn't have droned on quite so much, but I'm hoping I tackled a large number of questions there. I will, for those bothering to ask, I'm going to quickly look through them. If I don't feel like if I feel like I answered your question in the presentation, I'm not ignoring you. It's more, in the interest of time, or if they make me laugh. Can investors legally bribe via lobbyists in Mexico to expedite permitting process? I do not believe so, but you are welcome to extol the virtues of what Cerro de Oro can bring to local economies and the federal economy as much as you like. We certainly do, but in a very much above the board manner. In terms of weather, God, I haven't been asked about weather for a while. I felt like I was an amateur CNN meteorologist a few years ago. The heavy drought is definitely past its worst. Mexico's still dry. I mean, we have comfortable water right now, and Zacatecas certainly is not as has not been as impacted as Sonora. So I really hope that I don't have to have that CNN meteorologist hat on my head that much more. So someone asked, and this is interesting, is there a website to see all the permits in the queue so someone can gauge? In the AMLO years, I think there was a Sermonat website. It just never got updated. And so it was so in many ways, it kind of almost fed into headlines, except our permitting consultants in Zacatecas have been they permitted an open pit coal mine in late 2022, but you wouldn't see it down there on the site because the site wasn't updating. So yeah, hang on a sec. I can't scroll down the chat. So does MAI have interaction with Sermonat on the Santana pad or CDA permits, or are you simply waiting for word? No, there is constant dialogue. We kind of highlighted it. What I realize a lot of the time is we were saying things in press releases such as we're having constructive dialogue with Sermonat. And quite honestly, I was almost starting to call BS on it being phrased like that because nothing was moving. I mean, I think what we found with the permit amendment in 2023 was it was slower, but everything was back and forth. It was full engagement. This stuff wasn't dropping into some black hole and then you were just guessing. So yeah, there has been back and forth with Sermonat. I think most recently on Cerro de Oro, the biggest thing they wanted us to update was the environmental baseline work. I talked about that in the Colorado conferences. We had 2022 environmental, flora and fauna survey work done at Cerro de Oro. Well, there's no country in the world, Canada, the US, anywhere, that is going to permit something based on stale dated environmental data. And as I joked at Beaver Creek, it's not like in the last couple of years herds of wildebeest have started grazing on Cerro de Oro. Nothing's changed. So we updated that, and that was a good example of the kind of interaction we have. Yeah, there is, and it's not just for us, it's other companies. One of the reasons I was buoyed at the Colorado conferences and taught so positively at a time where I felt like I'd shot myself in the foot way too many times, I got no toes left, on timelines, was it wasn't just what we were hearing from Sermonat. We were talking to bigger peers down there. They were hearing the same thing. The Sermonat kind of needed to see the old guy gone, but which has happened, and now there's new people in charge, and a Sermonat that said things are going to start to flow, but they just weren't going to flow on day one of the new Scheinbaum administration. It just doesn't work that way. I know it's kind of odd right now because we're seeing Mr. Trump signing all these executive orders day one in the office. It's like, why couldn't Claudia Scheinbaum have that system? It just doesn't work like that in most countries. Well, I don't think that there's a buyback in our stock with cash flow from Santana. Santana should be supporting the rest of the company's activities. Trust me, I hated that there was such sticker shock on us doing our first equity raise in 2.5 years. And arguably, if permitting had been faster in Mexico, we don't have to do that raise. So if there is 20 million shares I'd like to buy back, as soon as we have excess cash flow from getting Cerro de Oro and Sabre up and running, it's those 20 million shares I'd like to buy back. But no, I think we buybacks, just like dividends, can be in our future. But right now, that's not would not be a good use of cash to deploy. Someone asked about the 2018 Fortuna PEA numbers, which had a 440 ASIC and a $26 million capex. But those are 2018 numbers. So arguably, we do have large parts of the mill already owned, so there's no real capex appreciation on that. I've spitballed that probably the capex at Fortuna now is closer to Cerro de Oro. It's in the $35 to $40 million range, similar to Copperstone. And that ASIC, maybe it's not running at 440, maybe it's running at, heck, you could double it. You could double that, and you are talking sub 900 ASIC. It is super low. I mean, it won't be a doubling of that. That's a 3.5 gram open pit with a 6-to-1 strip. The costs on that kind of operation are stupidly low. We just want to make it a bigger operation before we build it. There's just too much untapped potential, and you want to ensure that you've planned all your mining, or where you're putting it, processing facilities, all that stuff, appropriately for the future development of how much bigger Fortuna can be. I'm sorry for the 98 that are holding on. I appreciate it, and maybe this makes up for why I didn't do a Minera specific town hall last year. I actually do hope that I will be doing these at least twice a year, and in time maybe we do our quarterly announcements in a town hall setting like this, but you will see a little bit more of me this year in these. What would it cost to extend Oro beyond May? Well, in terms of extending Oromet, the 5 million beyond May, we've already talked to another lending group that could easily just replace that facility and push out repayment terms and even interest on it. So, But we're working closely with Oramet. We're working with them on the overall project finance for Cerro de Oro. And in light of this shifting sentiment in Mexico, we felt it was appropriate to extend with them at this time. We are also have had early conversations with Oramet about how we can tailor the Cerro de Oro package in such a way that Copperstone kind of comes under its umbrella. But I think we are better off having the Oramet package clear for Cerro de Oro, and having a separate package, whether it be by Oramet or another lender for Copperstone. Early conversations with some project finance groups have been pretty encouraging in that regard for Copperstone. And my favorite guy, hi Sean. I think that's about it. Apart from some of the people obviously unhappy. I get it. I get why you're unhappy. Performance has not been great. I'm not going to make excuses. The reality is aspects of Mexico were outside of our control, and we have tried our best to navigate very tough waters for the last 2 years in Mexico. They have been harder than any year in the 15 that our team have operated down in Mexico, and they are improving. And you know, the reality is we are trying to advance things with better control and self-determination. Copperstone is one of those elements. The improving environment in Mexico should make up in short order for some of the disappointment over the last couple of years. And I share that disappointment. But the team has been trying its best navigating pretty much uncharted territory in Mexico, where you have a de facto shadow ban on advancing mines that is not enshrined in law, but it's kind of one man's edict. That's an almost impossible situation to have to deal with. So anyway, with that, I appreciate you sticking around as long as you have today, and thank those that are continuing to support the company. And I look forward to speaking with you again, where you can hold me to account for the stuff I've said today.